Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. One of the areas of mindfulness in manufacturing was just being more mindful of our conversations. And we don't want to get that confused with having comfortable conversations, because we got to lean into those uncomfortable conversations. And the book that I'm writing is all about your results come from deeper conversations, not telling people what to do. And so the recent book I just read is called Death by Comfort. What a great title. How Modern Life is Killing Us and What We Can Do About It, by Paul Taylor. And he's joining us on the show here today. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me, Trevor. Good to be here.
Well, first of all, let me tell you about Paul. Not only did I get to meet him in Bangkok when he was the keynoter at our Emotional Intelligence Conference with Genos, but he's also a former British Royal Navy aircrew officer. Paul is an exercise physiologist, nutritionist, neuroscientist who is currently completing his PhD in applied psychology.
And I reckon I'm about 2 to 3 weeks off submitting my PhD thesis, so getting close.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know, one of the things I've learned about you already, Paul, is that, you know, when I look in the back of your book and all the different research that you do, and when I talk to you in your reference, you break it down simple, because manufacturing, we need it to be broken down simpler for us. So thank you for being our translator of all this information today.
Yeah, look, I like to call myself a pracademic, which means I like to take all the geeky academic research, analyze it, break it apart, and then turn it into tools and solutions that normal people can use to improve their lives.
And yeah, you do a great job at that. And I embraced your book and some of your other areas that I've heard you on your podcast. And it's resonating as I'm doing my writing. Because like here you've done all this research on like stress and embracing the discomfort. So the term that I really got attached to was stress fit. Because in manufacturing, we say, well, you know, you got to have a little bit of stress to get results. But then sometimes I know, because I ran manufacturing plants, if I get too stressed out, I can't think anymore. So I like to call it like we need a certain level of tension.
Yes.
Like you're the one that's done the research on this. What is the right level of tension stress?
Yeah, well, look, it varies for different people, and it varies for what stage of your life you're in and all of the other things that are going on in your life at the same time, right? But if we think about it, the whole idea of stress fitness, it's a bit like physical fitness in that there's a continuum, right? So there's people listening to this right now who are low fitness physically. There's people who are moderate and there's people who are high. But the stuff that distinguishes them, the people who are high from low, is that the people who are highly physically fit do the work and they do it consistently, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that consistent exposure. And then from a physical training perspective, one of the key principles is this thing called progressive overload, that you need to progressively, incrementally overload the system in order to stimulate adaptation. So, you know, the worst thing that some people do in physical fitness is they find workouts that they like and they do the same workout over and over and over again. Now, they'll get a bit of growth because the growth comes from the stimulation. But then after a while, the body's going, hey, you're not asking me to do anything else, so I'm not going to change. And the human body and brain is enormously adaptable, right? But the key is that progression needs to be small enough, right? So we can't just take somebody who's not fit at all and then train them like a professional CrossFitter, right? That gap is too much. And then it's the same for individuals, right? The long-winded answer to your question is how much stress is enough is probably stuff that is just outside of what your comfort zone is right now, right? Mm-hmm. But it is that balance between stress and recovery. Exercise creates the stimulus. The muscles become bigger, faster, stronger in the recovery process. And this is really critical, that when people are exposed to psychological/emotional stress, that stress can help them grow if they recover effectively. And I'm just going to give a spoiler alert to all the listeners. Recovery is not sitting with your feet up with a bottle of wine watching Netflix. That's relaxation, right? The two are very different things.
So what you're saying is, if we want to be resilient at work with stress in manufacturing, we got to have some level of physical fitness in order to deal with that, right? Like I know sometimes when I was able to bike like 25 minutes to my workplace at one point. And that was just fantastic because I was able to get some high energy exercise before I went into work. And you notice that if you're listening right now and you're in one of those situations where you're working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, or hopefully not 7, it's difficult to get out of that trap because we feel like we got to be at work more, but then we're not taking the personal time for ourselves to have some resistance training, whatever that is, lifting weights for you or running. And I know it's probably better to have both. But if we're not taking care of ourselves physically, sleeping, all those areas you talk about in your book, when it comes to the workplace scenarios, you're not going to be able to respond as well. You're going to be reacting.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we know from the science now is the existence of something called the cross-stressor effect. And basically, that the research shows that people who have higher levels of physical fitness handle emotional and psychological stress better than people who are low physical fitness. And the reason is, and it's really obvious, but it's one of these things that when it's kind of highlighted to you, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And it's the same system in the body. This human stress response system is the same system that is activated by exercise, psychological stress, and emotional stress. And that emotional psychological stress can be real or imaginary, right? It's all to do with two parts of the stress response system, the SAM axis, sympathetic adrenal medullary. So that's the inside part of the adrenal glands that release adrenaline and noradrenaline. In North America, you call those epinephrine and norepinephrine. And then that's a very fast acting part of the nervous system that people will know as the fight or flight response, right? And then we have something called the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal cortex, that releases cortisol, which a lot of people will have heard of, right?
Yeah.
And in the short term, cortisol is a good thing. It works in with adrenaline and noradrenaline like a kind of a SWAT team to increase your arousal levels and get you up for whatever that challenge may be. But we know that particularly long periods of higher levels of cortisol makes you fat, makes you sick, and destroys your brain function. We have those two parts to our stress response system, the same things that are activated with physical as well as psychological stress. So as I say to people, when you're exercising, every time you're exercising, you're training your stress response system globally, not just to respond to the stress of physical exercise, but to respond to other stress. And we know, Trevor, that a lot of it is about, and this gets back to my stress fitness, is the ability to switch on the stress response system when it's needed, maintain it for however long you do, but then switch it off. And most people don't have an issue with switching it on. The kind of people you'll only find really there are severely depressed people who can't get out of bed. They got trouble mounting a stress response. Cortisol gets suppressed in them and then they've got no energy. Most of us, we have an issue with switching off, coming back from a hard day's work, shattered, and everybody's been there, right? You might come back and you've got some work to do on your laptop. You finally get it done. You're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be asleep within 5 seconds. Your head hits the pillow and then your brain goes on fire, right? That is an inability to turn off the stress response. If we just dive into that in a minute, what we know is high intensity interval training is the best way to improve that ability to switch it off because it activates what's called the parasympathetic, the rest, digest, recover. So think about what's happening when you're doing high intensity interval training, whether it's resistance training or running. You know, you go hard, you back off, you go hard, you back off. When you go hard, you're pressing the accelerator of your stress response system. Then when you back off and recover, even for 15, 20 seconds, you're switching over into your parasympathetic, or you're hitting the brake. And that accelerator brake is training that stress response system to be stress fit.
Interesting. So I didn't even know I was doing that when I was like doing a sprint, then running slower, doing those hard reps, taking a break, doing a different exercise. So all that is kind of teaching us. Something that you helped me with that I actually have to do a little bit less of now. I was taking 3-minute cold showers. But when I read in your book, it's like, yeah, the studies between 1 minute and 3 minutes isn't that much.
So you could go back to a minute.
One whole thing I could reduce though, because that was interesting. Because someone asked me, well, why do you take cold showers? And I said, I kind of forget, because I just know it has to do with the immune system, but you explained it really well.
Yeah. So there's a number of things that go on, right? You get a boost in your immune system, but you also get a big boost of dopamine and noradrenaline, right? Or norepinephrine, as the Americans call it, right? So, and dopamine is important for goal-directed behavior and motivation. And noradrenaline/norepinephrine is important for mood and focused attention. So that's why, and everybody I talk to who does cold showers go, you know what? Now I've been doing it, like I can't get away from it, because I feel so good afterwards. I feel motivated, and that's because, but let's think of the evolutionary reasons for this. If you're to fall into cold water, your body mounts that cold shock response that goes, we need to get the hell out of here. So it increases dopamine to actually drive that goal-directed behavior. I need to get the hell out of there. And it increases noradrenaline in the brain, which is about focused attention. So it's just like, Trevor, you need to put all the resources into getting out of this bloody freezing cold river that we've just got in, right? But we know that those effects are lingering. They last for quite a while. And that's why people will report that they feel a lot better after they've done a cold shower. And look, the other thing is about doing hard stuff. Like that, I don't think that you can underrepresent the importance of just doing hard things, because it actually builds your self-efficacy and your confidence in yourself that then spills into other areas, particularly around stress, because then we get into the whole challenge and threat response, right? So that if you view as a potential stressor as a challenge, it is actually better for your cardiovascular system and your stress response and your immune system than if you view it as a threat, right? And that's part of the psychology of resilience or hardiness, is viewing adversity and change as challenge and opportunities for growth. But really, you can only have that if you have confidence in your own abilities. And we get that through doing hard stuff.
Yeah, we
like
get the
cold showers, lots of other things, right? It's just extending yourself physically and psychologically, builds that self-confidence, and that then enables that challenge response, which is a much healthier psychological response to change and adversity. And there'd be in manufacturing lots of change going on, lots of adversity as well.
This leads us perfectly into this. Well, the one thing I caught that you did say there earlier too is that, and that stress can also just be perceived stress, right? A couple of things that I've heard you say is that your body, if you tell it that this job is stressful, it's going to listen to you, and it's going to become this whole message that you're sending to your body. So be careful what you're telling yourself. And the funny one is, no one's talking about, well, what's the greatest accomplishments of your life? What are you most proud of? Well, it's like, you know what? I lived really comfortably. Like I really didn't push myself, and I really just didn't do anything that was uncomfortable. Like nobody's telling that story.
Exactly. But people just reflect on their biggest achievements in their life. The listeners, what is the stuff that you're most proud of? And I can guarantee you, for 99% of people, it involves stress and discomfort, being out of the comfort zone and having to adapt, because that's really where we grow, right? That's the key thing. Us physiologists, stress, right? That's the type of stress that leads to growth, whereas de-stress is the type of stress that breaks you down. But your psychological orientation of whether you view a potential stressor or some adversity as a challenge or a threat can actually send it one way or the other, right? And so that, real or imaginary, you could sit here right now, and your listeners could sit here right now and ruminate about some bullshit that happened in their lives 20 years ago, or an argument that they had last week. and you'll create a stress response as if you're being chased by a lion. But you can also catastrophize about what might happen in the future, whether you're into manufacturing or how this change progress is going to go, or whether your kids are going to be okay, your relationship's going to be okay, and you will create a stress response as if you're being chased by a lion. You know, we are the only species whose thoughts can activate the stress response system. So we need to be very careful about the thoughts that we linger on.
That is mind-blowing to think that we're the only species that can do that, and to think about how much stress are we putting on ourselves, the what ifs. And I think it's some of my favorite. I'm helping manufacturers, I'm working with them, and it seems like we've got this threshold of like having these uncomfortable conversations of work performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen the extreme where it's kind of the sandwich approach. You're really good at this, but kind of pay attention to this and just keep doing this because you're wonderful. And it's not leaning into it, right? Instead of, Paul, you're a good man. I know you take care of yourself, but that project was late last week and that affected everything. Like, what's going on? Let's talk about that. What I see is, an email goes out saying, hey, you should have had that in on time. Or a leader in manufacturing will write somebody up and say, okay, Paul, I'm giving you this written warning. You were late on this project. Okay, sign here. They seem okay with that. But to actually say, well, yeah, you've got a performance issue, but what's going on, man? Like what's behind that? Because we hired you for a reason. You're a good person. And I know you care about your work. But I'm really struggling helping leaders sit down and just have those more uncomfortable conversations. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, they're uncomfortable for a start, right? People don't like to have them and they tend to avoid them, sweep them under the carpet, leave them until they are absolutely necessary. For those uncomfortable conversations is the SBI model. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but situation, behavior, impact, right? So you'll sit somebody down and you talk about the situation and you're describing the situation like you're watching a video tape, right? And then you describe the person's behavior, what they did or they didn't do, right? The situation might be you were tasked with this piece of work that was important for a big project. It had to be in on this time and it wasn't in on this time. You didn't give it in on this time. The impact was that has had a knock-on effect to all of these different teams, right? And then you can offer up the resolution, right? What you propose that to be, or what do you think we should do about this? So tell me what's happening here, what's been going on, and get the person to talk about that. And then, when you're having those conversations and you're trying to coach somebody around it, I then like the OARS model for motivational interviewing. So ask them open-ended questions. Hey man, what's going on, right? Give them some affirmations about, stuff that they do that's good, or hey, they're telling you about something that's going on at home. That must be really difficult. That must be really challenging, right? So that's the O and the A. The R is where you reflect back the emotions that you hear. So somebody could be talking about difficulties in their life and, oh yeah, I'm sensing that there's sadness or there's frustration. Is that right? And that starts to create that rapport and that understanding. And then the S part of the OARS bit is that you summarize. Now, motivational interviewing comes out of behavior change. So in this situation, if you're trying to have a performance conversation, we've gone through the SBI model, we're in the OARS model. They're then, okay, so what do you think you need to do? And they're talking about the stuff that they need to do. That's a great idea, right? So you're encouraging the stuff that they're coming up with, and you're trying to get them to tell you what you want to tell them. People believe the stuff that comes out of their mouth more than when they're told, right? So that's the art of coaching, is getting somebody to tell you what you want to tell them. Then the S bit of this whole thing is you summarize the conversation, and you're particularly reflecting back what we hear is the change talk. And so what I'm hearing is that you are going to do this now, and this will lead to a better outcome. Combining those two things, the SBI model with a resolution and with that emotional intelligence that you talk about a lot, creating that rapport, that understanding through the OARS model, and then summarizing the conversation, that is going to leave that person in a much better place. Number one, they're going to feel heard. They're going to feel understood. They also know that their past behavior wasn't acceptable, but they've actually, through a discussion with you, and proposed a way forward, so they have autonomy around that change process of whatever needs to happen.
Those are some much more structured approaches, yet very similar to what I've been doing, right? That's a lot of trial and error, though.
And a lot of people do a lot of people, Trevor, will do, particularly if they're good people persons or good people, they actually will do some of these things instinctively, because you kind of work out how to win friends and influence people, as per Dale Carnegie, right? But these models just create a bit of a structure for you to have those conversations.
Yeah. And I needed that model 20 years ago because I just didn't have the tools in the toolbox to do that. So I think what's important, especially for young leaders in manufacturing, I mean, I was just looking at the Gallup reports, because I had a quote on my website that I think it was back in 2019 that manufacturing had a 25% engagement rate, and the average of all the industries was 33%. And so the 2024 study, the numbers are the same as they were like 5 years ago. So this is kind of the research that I've been doing. And it's kind of, well, why is that? And a lot of it has to do with just these conversations, right? Giving that model, because when I talk to some leaders, they're kind of like, yeah. So when I go in there, I'm going to tell Paul again, get really clear to him. I'm going to tell him this, and I'll tell him this. And if this doesn't happen, then this is going to be the results. And I'm like, but you've told him that before, right? Yeah, but I'm going to tell him again. I said, okay,
yeah,
let's think about this. Is their thinking really going to change if you're doing all the talking?
Yeah. And I would suggest that those low engagement rates are partly to do with the fact that leaders aren't engaging with them on a human level as well as they could do.
Yeah. 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 And either we're too distant or we're too close and we're just not having the real conversation. I use a chair model. My scientific model is if I'm talking to a person, I take an empty chair and I'm like, over in that chair is the problem, right? You and I are just talking. Let's look over there. That's the problem. Let's apply that. Let's separate it from all this, emotion we have right now. And then we can talk about a little bit about each other's behavior, how that's impacting it. So a little less scientific. But as we're wrapping, go ahead.
I would just add one thing there. And this is kind of my experience in the military. So the military are exceptional at communicating purpose. And, I used to fly in helicopters. Every single aircraft mission that I flew, there was that clear purpose. And we did a debrief as well. Every time I went on a detachment onto a ship, every single person who went on there knew the purpose of being on there. But really importantly, knew how their daily work contributed to the overall purpose or mission, right? And this is particularly when you get into manufacturing and people are doing jobs that aren't that stimulating mentally, right? Particularly if they're doing repetitive processes, having them understand how their work and them doing a good job contributes to the overall goals of the organization is really key in getting people engaged. And I'll just probably leave with this. One of the biggest thing that leaders can do is to foster this engagement in the bigger goals of the organization, that they have ownership, that they have a critical part to play, and not just that the chain breaks at its weakest link, but to flip that on its head, to go, you're a critical cog in this chain, and we're all working together for this greater outcome. And if we improve the greater outcome, then we're all going to be so much better off. But just helping people to find why their work is important on a daily basis, but especially if they're doing that manufacturing stuff, I think that is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and we just need to have that conversation, tie that in. I'm working with a new client right now, and that's one of the first conversations we're having for the executive team. Like, what's this for? What's our purpose here? I would be remiss if I didn't bring up this one last subject, and usually I'll say, how do you want to leave it? But this whole psychological safety, right? You've got some insights on that, which I resonate with, because we get into this whole aspect of we got to make sure we're careful in what we're saying and we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And I think sometimes that gets misconstrued with just being transparent.
Yes.
And if it's not good and we're not hitting our numbers or the quality's bad or we have a safety issue that's not being addressed properly, we have to just say it regardless of how we make people feel necessarily. It's how we deliver it. What are your insights on psychological safety?
Yeah. So if you look at psychological safety, which was created by Amy Edmondson, the whole thing of psychological safety is feeling psychological safe to give your opinions without fear of reprisal, right? And to contribute. It's not about not being held to account, right? A lot of people hide behind psychological safety of, you're making me feel unsafe because you're holding me to account. That's bullshit. That's not what psychological safety is. So I think it's understanding that, but it's then because those conversations do need to be had, particularly when they're around performance, because, people are paid. And most of the listeners, if you think about this, I would guarantee you that the vast majority of the listeners are paid per the terms of their contract on time every week, and probably 100% of what those terms of the contract says. Now, that contract is an exchange of labor for money, right? And so they're paying on time 100%, or the listeners giving 100% of effort all of the time, because that's what the contract is about, right? And so it's around having the conversation around those sorts of things, I think is really useful. But again, using the SBI model when they need to have those tough conversations, but understanding, particularly from the managers, psychological safety is not that you don't hold people to account.
Thank you. I want the listeners to hear that from you because I like the way you describe it. Paul, I knew this 30 minutes keeping you under was going to be difficult. I had too many questions, but so how do the listeners follow you, get your book, learn more about you?
Yeah, so the book is Death by Comfort in all good bookstores, plus Amazon is probably the way to get it. The podcast is the Paul Taylor podcast. They're probably the best ways. I'm at paultaylor.biz, I think, on Instagram as well. But it would be the podcast and LinkedIn as well. They're probably the best places to connect.
Well, we'll leave those links in the show notes. It's cool talking to you in the future. It's Tuesday morning for you in Australia.
Indeed.
It is North America here. I'm in the afternoon on Monday. And it was just a gift to share the stage with you in Bangkok and then have you be our keynoter. And thank you, Ben Palmer and Marie, for bringing you into the Genesis crew.
Now, look, thank you for having me on, and good luck to all your listeners and for the managers. Hopefully they take a few of those little things away just to ratchet up that level of engagement, because that's really key.
Right on. Thanks so much, Paul.
Pleasure.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.